Hello everyone, welcome back to the Barrel Vision Spotlight, and bloody hell, this lighting is shit. Welcome back. So I suppose I should give a brief update on the series. I did so in the stream on Monday. Basically, I'm going to be doing these once a week now, on Wednesdays, and the reason for this is because, well, there's a funny thing where I talked about how many episodes of this series I realised I could make, and then it gave me 8 years worth of content, which is absurd. But what that meant is, because I'm doing one a week, is that after I finished the first set of primary weapons, so after the GK2 episode next week, these videos will be on whatever I want out of that selection of things. So we're not, so it's not going to take me 5 years to get to an overclock that I want to talk about. I could do it. It could be the next video after the GK2 one, for example, could be that overclock where it is. For some reason, my brain is going towards super slim round for the stubby, even though I don't care about that at all. Still, that's probably going to be next. But obviously, as you can see, today's subject is the wonderful first driller primary weapon, the CRSPR Flamethrower. And like I said, it's the first driller primary weapon, and it, to me, while it identifies driller in a big way, as in, when it comes to deep rock, when people think driller, they think flamethrower, as well as drills, of course. But the flamethrower is an incredibly important part of its identity. I think it's actually the reason a lot of people pick driller. I would imagine it's actually the most popular reason, ahead of the drills, I would reckon. But to me, it's the least mechanically similar to the other two. And what I mean by this is that, while it still has some it still shows some foundations for this, the flamethrower is the least combo heavy member of the driller arsenal. Although it can sometimes rely on external influence to really make it work. But I say this because I don't think it was really designed with combos all that in mind. Whereas the cryo cannon is inherently that way, and it's baked into the sludge pump's DNA somewhat as well, given that the sludge pump has an upgrade that is more dedicated, in my opinion, to the sludge pump, given that the temperature shock build is for both the cryo cannon and the flamethrower, and the fact that sludge puddles can be set on fire by the EPC. So, to me, the cryo cannon and the sludge pump are more specifically designed with combos in mind. The flamethrower was more designed to work on its own, but in many ways it still doesn't, and we'll get to that, because what I realised when I was making notes for this video is that most of the things I'm going to be talking about are actually criticisms, despite the fact that the flamethrower is an extremely powerful crowd-clearing weapon, and even isn't that bad against sort of medium-level tanky targets like Praetorians and Wardens and Bombers. So let's talk range. Mid to close, not long range. The flamethrower is very specifically not long range, right? The cryo cannon can be with something like Snowball and Ice Spear. The sludge pump, while it has projectile drop-off, it uses projectiles, meaning that based on trajectory and based on what upgrades you take, you can hit enemies very far away. What's interesting to me about the flamethrower, in that it's very specifically mid to close range, is that it's actually lacking in the stopping power department, right? Because it's a wave clearer, it's a wave clearing weapon, but its DPS isn't particularly high. What it does best is just taking out a lot of enemies at the same time, but not particularly quickly, and not particularly in a way that keeps you safe. Large, massive grunt hordes will go down without you having to use much ammo, and they will go down within 10 seconds, except the guards. But the grunts can still get to you. You're not doing all of their health within the blink of an eye. And here comes more, criticism, is that it relies on damage over time, almost entirely. Except it kind of doesn't. The sludge pump does a bit of both. That it does have decent direct damage, but it's also its damage over time is quick, has a natural slowdown effect that accompanies it, and cannot be resisted by anything. The flamethrowers, to get to that damage over time, it has to be built up over time. Obviously, you can set things like grunts on basically instantaneously if you take the heat upgrade, but you still have to take time to apply that damage over time, and even then, it cools off quicker depending on the enemy type. It usually deals less total damage than corrosion, and also there are many enemies that resist it. What brings fire up, and I'll talk about this in the eventual fire status effect video, oh god, is heat spread, basically. And this is the only reason that the flamethrower is any type of ammo efficient, because without heat spread it would honestly not be as good against hordes as it is. The fact that on fire enemies spread their fire to other enemies means that you'd have to use nowhere near as much ammo as you would if fire spread didn't exist to take down large groups of grunts. It's really an invaluable mechanic to the flamethrower's success in battle. So I mentioned the lack of stopping power, and this isn't something that goes completely unaddressed. You know, you can see right here we have in separate tiers, in fact, sticky flame slowdown, which obviously makes the sticky flames slowing down actually from 10% to 55%, which is quite a bit. Now, I should point out, I was not aware that the sticky flames had an inherent slowdown, but it is only 10%. It's the only base stopping power that the flamethrower can inflict. And then in tier 4 we have fear. 0.2 fear though, however. It's not a great deal of fear, but you can still use it. And of course, sticky fuel, well, I suppose it doesn't actually increase the slowdown, but you know, you need it to do that. But obviously these two inherently have stopping power. This incurs quite potent slowdown on enemies, that can be increased even further with this, and even further with this. And obviously the cryo cannon simply freezes enemies in place. So as we can see, the flamethrower has a lack of stopping power. It's often difficult to stop enemies really from getting to you, even against those large grunt hordes that it can take care of fairly quickly. I find myself having to back up most of the time to avoid being hit, but they usually do die before they get to hit me. It's a combination of them being killed by the fire and me backing up. You do need to do both, and that's fine, you know, unless you're doing a salvage op, of course. But on top of this lack of stopping power, the flamethrower also has unfortunately low burst damage, and what we mean by this is not necessarily that it lacks high total damage. It doesn't, certainly. I mean, this statistic shown here might suggest that it doesn't have incredibly high total damage, but of course it does, because you can affect very many enemies. You can deal thousands upon thousands of total damage, but burst damage refers to how useful or how effective a weapon is at dealing damage in a short span of time to deal with problems quickly. It's not necessarily about ammo efficiency, it's not about damage over time or how much damage you can deal over time with the weapon's total ammo pool. We're talking about how much damage can you force out within a very short period of time to deal with problems. In the flamethrower's case, very little. It's not much of a problem solver, and that's where the secondaries come in, or the impact axes. In general, Driller relies on his secondaries. He relies on everything outside of his prime weapons to deal burst damage. His prime weapons deal good area damage and slowdown, flamethrower being the exception, but they don't inherently deal good burst damage, and which is where the secondaries come in, of course. I think the EPC is the exception, however, when it comes to the flamethrower. The Sabata, you would take volatile bullets, allowing you to do greatly increased damage to burning enemies, and then you could increase burst damage to a ridiculous degree if you were to use something like explosive reload. So here it is. But of course, with the wave cooker coming along, we now have exothermic reactor, which is the real way to deal burst damage with the flamethrower. because you can temperature shock large groups of enemies so easily. In fact, the addition of the wave cooker and of this temperature shock build that uses exothermic reactor, we have probably the best option for burst AoE, because it even outperforms something like Fat Boy, because Fat Boy is greatly limited by ammo pool. The build that creates this incredible amount of burst AoE with the flamethrower and the wave cooker is actually an extremely ammo efficient one. And this is something that I won't knock the flamethrower for. When you're using it properly, as in you're not using it to just pour ammo into enemies, you're not using it to deal a massive amount of health damage with the flamethrower's direct damage. As long as you're not doing that, it is a very ammo efficient piece of kit, which is something that I've failed to respect up until now. It also has a fairly comprehensive overclock selection and mod selection, I think. There's a good amount of choice on every tier. I do, however, still find that I prefer taking ammo pretty much consistently, because I don't particularly care for the sticky things mechanic, so these two mods are mostly useless to me, including this one. I prefer the heat. Fear, however, is very useful, if you want to take that. I think that's actually a good idea. I think flow rate is also fairly useless, so but here this is a big choice. Like, flame breach is very useful, obviously. Increasing a weapon with such short range, increasing the range of a weapon with such short range is obviously going to be a wise decision. So, what can we say in conclusion is that the flamethrower is within its role of a mid to close range, highly ammo efficient wave clearer. It does its job excellently, with the drawbacks of it being limited in terms of stopping power and burst damage, both of which can be accounted for by the rest of Driller's arsenal. And you probably don't have a very good build going if there aren't parts of your arsenal that can account for the flamethrower's lack of stopping power or lack of burst damage. You should naturally have these things accompanying your flamethrower in your Driller build. So it's difficult really for me to pose as a realistic criticism of the flamethrower, given that as long as you're not stupid, you're probably built in a way that covers for these weaknesses. So there you go. I do think a criticism that does ring true about the flamethrower, however, is, of course, well, I should mention, if you set a robot on fire, it will die instantly, which is a big strength, but unfortunately, something that it does lack is the ability to really do anything against bosses. By bosses, I would say I'm talking about the Dreadnoughts and Betsy and the Tyrant Weed. Now, it's mainly Dreadnoughts here, as in the flamethrower doesn't feel particularly good on elimination missions. I know this opinion might get me some flack, but I found neither the sticky fuel build or the face melter build to really cover for this and make it feel any better against Dreadnoughts. I think the flamethrower always feels pretty bad against Dreadnoughts. Betsy is a different story. You can't actually set Betsy on fire, but you can temperature shock it after damaging it with the flamethrower. Tyrant Weed, obviously, fire is actually good at dealing with the spitters and the healing pods, but the Corlock heart, as it were, goes unaffected by fire. You can still deal damage. You can deal damage to anything with the flamethrower, but I'm talking about not being able to set certain things on fire is a big drawback. But really is the Dreadnoughts, because you can't set the Dreadnoughts on fire. You can freeze them, and obviously corroding them is extremely easy. The sludge pump doesn't care. It doesn't take any time to reach its intended status effect. But obviously the flamethrower, well, given that it's entirely reliant on fire, that's all it does, and the fact that Dreadnought simply can't be set on fire, it becomes about half as weak, if not even less than half as good as it could be against Dreadnoughts. And I do think this is a significant criticism and a valid complaint. And it's a valid complaint not because every build has to be good on every mission, but it's because the flamethrower is the only weapon that is inherently worse for a particular mission type. I don't think this applies anywhere else. Exception being the cryo cannon on an industrial sabotage mission. Industrial sabotage, however, is much less common, and there's no enforcement, there's no need ever for you to do it, unless you want to do a mission. You sometimes get a daily challenge for the performance pass that requires you to complete industrial sabotage. Apart from that, I don't think either of these should be an issue. I don't think there should be any missions where a weapon is inherently worse, and I think if that's the reason why the cryo cannon, like why you can't freeze robots, is to balance out the fact that the flamethrower can't set on fire dreadnoughts, I would heavily disagree with that method of downplaying the flamethrower's weakness and downplaying the cryo cannon's strengths. I don't think that's a good way to go about things. I think both should be able to do those things. Potentially worse, maybe you can't set dreadnoughts on fire for very long, but you should still be able to do it. Same with freezing robots. And that's just my take. That, I think, is a valid criticism. All the other criticisms I mentioned, obviously, are accounted for either by mod choice or by your secondaries or your grenades or even the drills and the satchel charges. So yeah, the flamethrower is an incredibly effective weapon. I just wish you could kill dreadnoughts with it. Anyway, that'll be all. Next week I will be talking about the GK2, which will probably be a very criticism-heavy one again, except the GK2 might not have a way out of those criticisms so much as the flamethrower does, and we'll see about that. Anyway, this was Harry from Barrel Vision, and I'll see you next time.